Roko, so take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so the title is, as you can see, Retro Aesthetics in Video Games and Ecocriticism. What this is going to be, in a way, is a reflection of my PhD thesis, which was about identifying and countering anthropocentric elements in video games. But interestingly, retro aesthetics is not something that came up a lot for a long time. So one day, one of my supervisors said, you seem to be covering a lot of retro examples, and your own video game, the one I produced as part of my thesis, was very retro looking. So, I looked at it with this whole new perspective. And I think a part of it was me, my experiences from the 90s growing up with video games at that time. I think it was just very natural for me to view environmentalism in games through retro aesthetics. So I don't think I even realized I was doing it. And you'll see on this slide, I have two games which were quite influential. There were Final Fantasy VII and the Sony games. Ecocritical, yes, but definitely, with looking back, there's also a lot of reservations to be had. But yeah, I think the 90s were definitely a very influential time for environmentalism in video games, probably the most. So with the subject I'm covering, I always get a lot of confusion from people because they kind of assume it's this, if you're looking at ecocritical games, it's a specific genre almost. It's like, what are they? What are good ecocritical games? What aren't ecocritical games? And it's just something that is impossible, to separate into categories. I would equate it. It's like trying to separate art into certain categories. Is what makes art this thing and not the other thing. But the kind of this effort that has been built up over, I think, I would say definitely over the past decade, and further back, there's the category of green games. There is the category of serious games, which assumes that video games have this educational component to them. But I think they're just also kind of drops in the ocean of understanding, eco-criticism in video games as a whole. So yeah, it is just hard when you're like, can you recommend me some great green games? One problem, of course, I think the way this has developed, kind of the whole eco-critical way of video games, is that we tend to think about ecologies and environmentalism in the future sense. It is always something that's coming up. It is something that we need to confront, we need to handle, we need to change our technologies, we need to come up with better technologies, and so on. So it's very much forward-looking, which I think has held back a lot of research and how we view games, because the technological side still very much dominates conversations about games, both both academic ones and online discussions. So it's always this, it's always the technology leading it, which is of course the very crux of the problem, right? Not with only video games, but with our whole, with that whole period of the Anthropocene, right? It's the rapid growth of technologies. So whenever we discuss video games, there is this big duality to them. They are kind of the product of this most destructive period in human history. But they also give us this very fascinating insight into our own behaviors, ways of seeing the world, and how we model our ideologies through visuals, through gameplay. So that's a bit of a general lowdown. One of the books that was immensely inspirational for me was Alenda Chang's Playing Nature, especially from my perspective as a designer. It just offers a lot of ideas and criticisms. And there's Chang's quote where she's kind of confronting this medium, with the question why must video games replicate this, the same destructiveness, the same kind of human behaviors that we see in the real world. Why isn't it becoming a medium through which we can change that or kind of test different ways of seeing the world? Also, what was really inspirational was this manifesto of hers, which kind of gives these broad outlines for video game designers. So I really took this to heart. I kind of grappled with all of these when I was working on the production of my own game. And then I was also using these to look back at all these retro titles and see to what extent were they doing these things. So definitely not going to go over all of them, but I've highlighted graphics shouldn't be everything, because I think for this presentation at least, it's really relevant. It's emphasizing both the kind of the technological perspective and the aesthetic one that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so if we are identifying problems in existing video games, it is, the question is, what are they? How do they express themselves? So very broadly, this is a very broad paintbrush here. Basically, games are they're full of animals, full of animal characters. They're full of environments. Environments are critical to video games, to kind of almost sculpting the spaces in which we enter. So not like paintings, the kind of environments are key to understanding that medium. But so it is these two categories specifically and how they're handled. So environments are usually pretty backdrops in video games. If they have some kind of, if there is an emphasis on them, it is usually on them as a resource. So anyone that's played the game will knows that you need resources for things. So trees, grasses, like grass, whatever the game requires, as a building block. That's what those environments are usually about. Games are also full of monsters. So anyone that's played a game, has come up against or has killed, in the virtual world, thousands, maybe millions of monsters through their gaming career. And what are monsters? they're animals, but in a very kind of in a very skewed in a very skewed sense. But of course, there is a big duality to these animals in video games. So we see the monsters, but we also see the very cute, dependable animal companions. Games are also full of these. I've got, I think that's Charmander. I'm not the biggest Pokemon fan, but Pokemon would be a good example of that kind of the dependency. Also, they possess special powers, and the purpose of these powers is to support the player, to make them stronger. And in the case of Pokemon, they go back to their bowl, they go back to their prison, so to speak, and they come out when needed. But yeah, you'll be just overloaded. Games are overloaded with these cute animals. And usually the big eyes are a telling sign. You see big eyes, we're talking, friendly, dependable. So that's about animals and environments, but kind of generally speaking, what is preventing these elements from fading away or changing in video games? I would say is this constant reiteration of genres, of specific genres. So we see the action adventure genre, we see the role-playing genre, and these are very much about the killing of things, the killing of monsters, which you gain experience from. So they're very much embedded in these genres. It is very hard to imagine these games without that aspect. There have been attempts, definitely, kind of to mix them up, to make them kind of reflect on this practice. Shadow of the Colossus comes to mind, where you're killing these giant monsters only to realize the error of your ways. But that's very much subversion. What we see are these genres always repeating. Another factor would be just the increasing cost of productions of video games. So bigger production times, and you have less experimentation in those production times, which is a huge difference, from the 90s, even when you had all these games, coming out after a year, even less, made by smaller teams. So when money is involved, there's bigger risk involved. A big factor is, of course, what I mentioned before, the technology-driven graphics side of it. Gamers are very used to talking about graphics, which is a kind of, one size fits all explanation. Like, is this, how are the graphics in this? And of course, that's usually measured by the technology, right? Not the actual aesthetics of the product. And then you get realism. So technology seems to be driving realism rapidly, and that creates a lot of problems. Timothy Morton talks about the dangers around the illusion of no aesthetics in realism. So if you make something real enough, the viewer doesn't perceive that as being created by someone, as using a very specific aesthetic. It just becomes, that's realistic. That's what we're seeing. So that's the real danger, seeing these very anthropocentric genres, gameplay styles done in this realism way that kind of confirms this is reality. you know, this is our reality and this is the game. It just kind of just narrows the space for anything else. And what I talk a lot about in my thesis, but I won't go too much into it today, is the dominance of the hero's journey framework. So the narrative framework where we constantly need heroes, we constantly need them to be human, and we constantly need to kind of tell the same story again and again, you know. Superhero movies, Lord of the Rings, we've and it's become even more celebrated, I think, than ever before. It's kind of expected. So games are a big promoter of that very structure. One book that's also, I think, great to consider just came out this year is Zen and Slow Games by Víctor Navarro-Remesal, where he argues the retro styles in particular of video games have always been ecocritical and slow. They've always allowed a lot of space for reflection. They've always kind of slowed down time, you know, made it a kind of a particular kind of separated a time zone separate from, you know, real life. And the aesthetics of those video games, he argues, you know, have this tendency to kind of make people aware of the kind of the presentness of playing. So kind of seeing these pixels on screen, it's you're seeing, you know, it's very obvious that someone has spent a lot of time creating these aesthetics, which isn't always obvious when you're just kind of engaged in realism and fast-paced games, which don't allow that kind of slow process. So yeah, great book to look at that just came out. I always also want to touch on this perceived limitation of technologies and video games in the past as something I constantly run into, and it's kind of been getting on my nerves. So I wanted to address it. There's always this tendency, and I've seen it again and again, almost every YouTuber, when we're talking about the past, we talk about the limitations of technologies. It's like that technology was limited, but if they could do this today, they would do it so much better because technology has opened up. So they would do it more realistic. There would be more explosions. It would be more immersive for the player. And so I think this is very problematical, and it shows that kind of graphics technology first paradigm where people like are not realizing that, you know, each technology has its own limitations. And art happens within those limitations always. It's always been that way. But there's this kind of sense that we're going towards this limitless technologies. Like if technologies have been limitless, right? If technologies have been limited, are we going into a limitless world of technologies? Is that where we're heading? So yeah, I find that very kind of troubling. But it's not surprising. So the last technology was more limited. This new technology was less so, and and you keep going. Of course, we know that digital aesthetics are intimately tied to the use of particular technologies, and kind of all the artistry that goes into them is, you know, it's specific to that technology and period of time. So yeah, interestingly, from that perspective, when we're seeing games remade, they usually they have a hard time replicating that exact look, those exact aesthetics, or they go for a more realistic style, which kind of just deteriorates the original vision for those games, which is evidence of that. So yeah, my main argument, my main contention is that we really have to go backwards and unpack eco-aesthetics in retro games, because I think we're very much stuck, and we don't have a clear vision of how new technologies are going to make these games more eco-critical, or I haven't seen anything that's convinced me of that. Okay, let's see the time. Okay, so one thing I've chosen to look at today is, in terms of aesthetics, is the aesthetics of dialogue, which I think often gets swept under the rug in terms of eco-criticism. And we often forget that video games started as simple dialogue prompts. And one of the first games open, that the general public played was Colossal Cave Adventure, or Adventurer, yeah, 76, all the way back then. So this game was about reading these prompts that very vividly, very detailedly described the environments around you, and you had to make certain choices based on what you were reading. So it was definitely it was a very environmentalist game, because it was all about the environments. It was kind of reading those descriptions, imagining those environments, and then making choices around them. But yeah, video games then very quickly moved into visual spaces. And then this kind of original connection between text and the viewer, unraveled or opened up, to these endless possibilities in which we are living in now. So, once the player could see the world and the environment they were transversing, it immediately changed that aspect of video games. But I will argue there's been video games over, since that time, they've made really great use of text and dialogue. One was from early 90s, Loom. It was also an adventure game, PC adventure game. And I think it was a great way of connecting music. You had to play these notes to unlock certain things, visuals, and it had a lot of eco-critical dialogue. So you would go around changing the world, with these magical notes, and often the dialogue would confront you with the changes you had made. For example, you had to, I remember there was this tree, it had one leaf on it, you needed the leaf. And there was this very sad moment of that leaf coming down, and you realizing you've made this tree barren. You've killed off the last leaf. So yeah, it's a very quick example of that. But great game to look at how dialogue is crucial still. What I want to look at more is the dialogue in Chrono Cross, I think 2000s, of how non-visual aesthetic qualities of video games can be emphasized and utilized to convey themes of reflection, sadness, and environmental loss. So one problem with the use of dialogue today is that games are just absolutely filled with dialogue that confirms what environments are intended to be. Like we mentioned, they're very resource heavy. So if you're conveying things to the player about the environment, it's usually you've got to chop this tree down. You've got to go, you've got to go through this forest and take this path. You're the only way you're really narrating environments a lot of the time is to aid player to aid the player through the game, help him out, help him succeed in his goal. But I think one of the problems we can see that it's come from this is that this heavy use of dialogue has become reflected in the visual aspects of games. So on screen you'll see I'll have a map. Don't know from there's a lot of those. Basically they're all quest markers, and so the visual kind of environments have just become saturated with these quest markers, places to go, places you need to do something, because environments have become so reliant on this. You need to do this, you need to go there, you need to, take this resource down and so on. So yeah, there's an interesting dynamic there. The dialogue starts to reflect the visuals. They've also, as technology has progressed, they've also become candy wrappers. That's from Alenda Chang, her quote, which is basically like if you when you open up Windows and you have a pretty picture of some beautiful place on earth, but that's all it is. It's really just a pretty picture. It's not influencing the narrative. It's not influencing the in-game interactions. And there you've got from The Last of Us, but I think that's the show, not the game. Characters stop to admire the view. And the point of that is, I guess, designers have spent so long creating this beautiful view in 3D spaces. You wanna show it to them. You want the player to appreciate it, but it's not really. It's not really figuring into kind of the gameplay and narrative sense. Okay, so with Chrono Cross, I don't know if this will play, probably will. They just okay. Um, so this is the opening cinematic of Chrono Cross, and I think it's very interesting because it starts out as a book, and you're seeing these letters come on screen, which really, it really sets the stage of how important dialogue is within the game. Okay, I think that's enough. Let's, let me just go back if I can. So maybe if I get to the end up there. Hmm. Or is it? Okay. Hmm.
I wonder if you
Any
need
tips?
to. I was just going to suggest stop sharing and then reshare your slideshow again if you can't get out of the video.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
maybe. Okay. I'll get I'll get back into it. Let me just
All good.
I've had this, yeah, I think I've had this problem once before. It was just,
Because it was embedded in the PowerPoint and then you couldn't get
yeah,
back to the PowerPoint. Is that what
yeah,
happened? Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Okay, I'm back. But I think there'll be that for videos. Okay, I'll show you.
If you want to drop links in the chat to videos, we can always have a look at them later.
Is that okay again?
Yep, can see your slides.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, that's great.
Sorry about that. So yeah, the importance of dialogue in Roko specifically. So this is just one little example from the game. But there is all these NPCs, which are the non-playable characters in the game. And they all have a lot to say about their lives and how it's entangled with the environment, what it means to them. And it really influences the player in a lot of ways, beyond just fulfilling a mission or a task. And it's usually quite subtle. You have to go out of your way to talk to these people, but the message that they convey is really crucial to the message of the game. So in one scene, there's this old man fishing that you can go and talk to him. And he says, life on this planet was born of the sea and will eventually return to it. Says, it shouldn't be too long now before my day will come to return to the sea. When the time comes, I would like to drift away, humming a quiet tune. So this seems like, okay, great. It's a nostalgic old man. But much later on, there's this really important scene in which the main character discovers that he's actually deceased in this alternative timeline that's been opened up in the game. And in the picture you can see he looks at his own grave and it says, nobody can take anything away from him, nor can anyone give anything to him. What came from the sea has returned to the sea. So that is a very similar message to what we heard from that old man, which ties back to everything to the sea as this kind of all-powerful force in life. And as you're reading that, it's just the sound of the wind, the birds, and the environment. So it's quite impressionable, and it doesn't. It doesn't beat you over the head with it. It's up to you to try to connect those, messages about the world. So yeah, dual sense of attachment and connection. Okay. Now we get to my game that I've been producing as part of my thesis. Now, the way the way I approach dialogue in my own game, it's called Nautilus Epoch. At first, I struggled with finding a place for dialogue because having a game about environmentalism just spoke to me that it shouldn't have dialogue. The environment should be telling the story, right? But that changed quite a bit. So one solution I found, because the game as a whole takes place in this Nautilus shell, so the characters go into it and it becomes a universe all on its own. And so the dialogue mostly comes from the shell itself. So it's the environment constantly speaking to the player. And also this environment is not neutral. So I kind of use that expectation, of this kind of godlike entity that is always right, that is leading the player onto, some kind of great mission. But really, it turns out this shell kind of has its own agenda. You know, it's been under the sea for a long time, and it's influencing you in a way that really serves itself. So I thought this was a good way to kind of include dialogue in it. So it's like the environment is talking to you. And it's also talking to the characters, so it's influencing different characters. So, but it's definitely done in this kind of godlike narration that makes you think, you know, this is the hero's journey. This is the legend I'm going to be playing in this game. And then it's only at the end that you know, you come to realize that this shell had its own agenda and perspective the entire time. And now another big category I like to look at is abstraction, or the art of abstraction. This is a quote from Mark Wolf, who says, rather than to try to avoid abstraction or sublimate abstraction, game design can usefully incorporate abstraction, resulting in new gaming experiences and gaming conventions. So it's something I definitely agree with. And the example I have here, I think, is a great showcase for that. It's a newer game, I mean, relatively new, Abzu. But it uses these kind of retro-inspired abstract visuals to tell its story. It's by the same producers of Journey, which is very, very well known as a game that told its story through its environments without any dialogue whatsoever. And just a quick recap, what's going on in here. And there's no dialogue. You are this robot that has been sent down into the ocean to explore it. You look very human, but at the same time, it's, you know, it's weird. But what really helps that is that abstraction, is that style. So it's between realism, it's between, you know, and something completely abstract with these shapes and colors being important. And so you identify with him, you know, from the human body. He's the hero. And eventually the main pull of the narrative is the shark that you encounter. At first you confront the shark, you're scared of the shark, but eventually you befriend it and you turn against other machines in the water that are connected to yourself, the robot, and these other robots. So it's a journey underwater, but it makes you ultimately side with the natural wildlife because you realize what is happening. A shark dies in front of you, and later on, you know, you're swimming along with a shark, destroying these machines. Now the style, if we're going to talk about abstraction, why it's significant, it's a style that's usually called the demake, which is using newer technologies by just limiting the number of polygons, kind of using more flat surfaces, which saves a lot of production time and energy, probably. But I think it's also important it desituates the player. So it gives them less anthropocentric baggage to take with them. It's you know, there's no cool hairstyles, there's nothing you can kind of grab onto as, you know, this is something human and cool. But at the same time, you know, you're identifying with the character, but also that character is closer to animals and other things in that environment, if that makes sense. And yeah, so it utilizes abstraction in a lot of ways. One happens when you discover these murals underwater. And this is all told through visuals and abstractions. So it's kind of documenting the human race in a way. The human race is the yellow. The shark, the wildlife is blue. And then you see first humans worshipping the wildlife, and then eventually, you see the yellow dominate in all these pictures. And it's completely changing that relationship of utilizing water in a very self-serving way. I'm not going to play this, but oh no, I might not have a choice. Basically, one of the things how abstraction is used, one way abstraction is used, that you can sit on these stone sharks, and then you enter this meditative state where you can view different animals, you can view different fish. But I think what's great about it is that from afar they look like almost like dots. It's very abstract. And then when they come closer, you can see more details. But yeah, this isn't something you have to do at all. It's just it's a device that lets you appreciate that environment if the player chooses to. If he's intrigued, like let's see what these fish and what these animals are around me. I think it's a great way of encouraging a sense of appreciating the environment, but it isn't kind of forcing it down your throat. Okay, now we're probably going to be stuck again, unless. Okay, no, got it this time. Let's get back to it. Okay, great. Another example of abstraction, one I covered in my thesis was with the chocobo. The chocobo is the animal mascot of all the Final Fantasy games. So if you've played any of those, you've probably encountered ridden a chocobo before. And this was interesting to see. We were talking about before. We were talking about the producer of Animal Crossing, and it reminded me of this. So the creator of the chocobo, in an interview, he told this story that he had this little chick growing up that his parents brought. They sold it off. He was devastated, and he wanted to make something on that animal. So he came up with this strange big yellow bird. But I thought what was really interesting in the interview, how he's expressed, since creating that mascot, he thinks it's been misused a lot. And he was saying he's quite disillusioned about the way it's been progressed, because he imagined it as this very equal player companion. So not just an animal, you're constantly with him, like you can see in that art. You're constantly interacting, talking. He's telling you about what is. In a way, the chocobo is the hero. He's kind of he centers that human character. He's kind of the moral, the moral side of that character. So I won't. Okay. Before I play that, so this is the form of abstraction the first game had, with the chocobo. And what's interesting about this, you only get to control that little bird, the chocobo in it. So a lot of abstraction like this in games is characters coming together. So you assume other characters are with him now, but you're controlling the chocobo on the world map. So that's a little detail, but I thought it was really interesting that, that's what abstraction allows for. You don't need to show all these humans tagging along. Like, you just get to ride a chocobo. Sorry, I meant to say control the chocobo. Okay, let's keep going. So yeah, when did okay, when I mentioned illusionment, when does that kick in? I think the best example of that would be just the new game, the latest game we've had, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So that just kind of, there's a lot of chocobos, but they're far away from player companions. They're these animals you can race, professional racing. You can breed them. You can dress them up in all these kind of human accessories. You can put bandanas, glasses on them, whatever you like. They don't have any agency in the narrative. There's never a chocobo telling you where you should go, how they feel. They're always very chirpy. They're always very happy. So they're kind of that, the stereotypical happy player animal companion. So this is kind of regarded as normal, but it was a fascinating case to look at, because that's not what the intention of that character was at all. And then you have this, almost like this hyper realism. So when people say, technology just needed to improve to have a better representation, and this is the kind of representation we've got. So it's completely just it's it's just an animal there for the human player to kind of just do what he will, basically. Now, yeah. So last thing, in my own game, Nautilus Epoch, I think the main way I was using abstraction, I was thinking of playing with scale in it, because the characters are in this Nautilus shell that they explore. So that flips, like that changes the scale, like how can a human and all these animals coexist? My explanation is that their actual memories that kind of the shell has in them, kind of keeps within them. So they're not like actual living characters, but it allows all these different animals, all these humans to be in this space together. And then one thing you're doing with in the game is you're kind of forming these star constellations, and they're of the different animals. And so they kind of, become huge. They're all over the screen, which I thought was just a way of kind of using abstraction to emphasize their importance. So kind of balancing out, everything human-centric, make them big, make them important, and have the game show that to the player. I think this would have been much more difficult, not to mention more time consuming, if you didn't have a lot of abstraction, if you weren't using those 2D images, and it just lets you play with scale so much more easier. And that is that. So the conclusion is that ecocritical games have always existed. It's just, it's different varieties of ecocriticism, specific to what was available at that time. But I think looking back at it with what we know now, we can really open that up. We can see even more value in it than ever before. And just in terms of the future, like future games, I think they really open up alternatives to kind of all the graphics driven games of today. And they have done that. There's, the indie space is booming. There's more people creating games than ever. So it's definitely based on technology, but I think it's a more artistic, constructive way of working with technologies. It's saying we've got this technology, it's cheap, or it's on these old computers. I was using this very old computer for most of my own production time. And it's saying we can create something meaningful and interesting with this. We don't need to be led by more money, better programs, and so on. So, and yeah, the picture you see is a chocobo, but it's been drawn in textures, which I think kind of retro aesthetics allows for that. I think just appreciation of an art form. Every one of those pixels has been made by someone, and then allowing the players to see that and experience that. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Roko. There was so much in that presentation. Yeah, I have some thoughts and questions, but I think maybe I should first open up to other people who might have questions. We've got about half an hour to chat, so plenty of time. You can type in the chat or just raise your hand or just shout out.
See the chat. Let me have a look. Or maybe I'll stop sharing. Okay.
Well, I could actually start with a question I had. I mean, really just a reflection, because I'm currently writing something on the kind of like environmental aesthetics of children's television programs from the 1990s. So I was kind of quite interested in your kind of framing, of video games from that period. And I mean, I think, well, I sort of think of it as a green wave in the 90s where you did have a lot of kind of environmentalist messaging coming through children's like animations, films, TVs, and video games. And I think there's a few reasons
and
for
Planet
that.
and all those cartoons, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And but I guess I just wanted to ask you about a little bit more about how you are thinking about that period of time and what was kind of unique about it. Because I think there's the aesthetic dimension, but also like narratively and ideologically, because I mean, thinking about Final Fantasy, for instance, like, it's a really quite a politically engaged militant plot line that is happening in that. Yeah.
7, with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
eco terrorists, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which was also, I mean, my kind of thinking is there was like, lots of very important big global targets and aspirations. So there's that kind of heightened consciousness. But then in the 80s and 90s, you've got all of the kind of monkey wrenching and eco-terrorism and arson and all of that kind of militant stuff happening around environmentalism. But I guess, that's sort of background. But I'm sort of interested to hear from you about the 90s and how you think about that, and also maybe how it's informed your own video game.
Okay. I haven't thought too much about it until recently. And then I was also thinking, how much are we blinded by the nostalgia of it? But no, when you mentioned all those examples, I think it did feel very green. And I think especially if you were in your formative years, it was especially impactful because it was something you were talking about at school. You watch those morning cartoons. We mentioned Captain Planet, but all of them had some kind of green angle to them. And then you started playing these games, which you know, maybe you only had a limited understanding of what was going on. But I think the overarching theme was nature is important, and the environment is important, and you have to, it's like that's the right way to go. That's the way we should be going towards that. I don't feel that in almost kind of, it's, yeah, I don't feel that now in a lot of media.
Mm.
That's kind of that's emphasized. Yeah, so there was a lot of yeah, I think there was a lot of different media, and I think it kind of all, came together at that right time when when you're still kind of learning, how do I see the world and so on.
Mm.
So that's definitely important. With And it kind of sets the stage. You mentioned you mentioned Final Fantasy VII Eco-Terrorist. Um, I think he sets the stage for that, because when you hear what they want to do, they're trying to blow up they're not nuclear reactors, but yeah, kind of, yeah, reactors polluting the planet. I think he sets the stage where that makes sense, where you're like, oh yeah, I get people who want to do that. They're trying to save the planet.
Mm.
Where I guess you call it big. It's interesting because that game got remade, and a lot of those aspects were very toned down and kind of. I guess they didn't want the main characters to come up as terrorists willing to kill people. What I think what happens, like the bad guy set them up. He wanted to sacrifice people, where that wasn't in the original. They were willing to sacrifice people, but they also feel
Mm.
towards the end they also kind of come to the realization that it wasn't the right way. Um, but yeah, I think it sets the stage for that. And I mean, there's a lot of people that have been talking about, right, like the advent of right-wing politics. And I think one thing is where I think the mainstream, um, the mainstream isn't influenced, like, that doesn't have access to those kinds of media, to that media and those ideas. So I think I have a feeling like when you see, like, you have extremes, and you had extremes of environmentalism for sure, but then you had kind of people in the middle who kind of acknowledged that it was important, and you as a kid growing up, knew it was important. You weren't gonna bomb someone. But I feel like we don't have any more, and so I
Mm.
think all it's being completely pushed away to where
Mm.
um why would you it nothing, basically nothing comes before people. People are
Mm.
all important. And then it's people, but you need people coming up with new technologies and solutions, and we can do it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Anyone
But yeah, your,
else?
your
Yeah.
your topic sounds fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'll share it at a later point. Yeah, Deborah, did you have your hand up? Yep, go for it.
I've got all these arms behind me, so it's probably
Yes,
confusing, right?
I did a double take.
I'll do some voguing while I'm at it. Yeah, thanks, Roko. Really interesting. I'm just thinking, I get what you're saying about sort of mainstream games going back to that more human-centric approach. But what about, I mean, I am aware of sort of conservation groups, and I mean, I know it's a sort of different genre, but you know, who have sort of started eco video games as a mode of education and, you know, for various different age groups, not just children. What's your thoughts on that, or is that sort of beyond the scope of what you're interested in, and because you're mostly focusing perhaps on mainstream games rather than games that were deliberately designed as a form of eco education or
probably is.
activism?
I admit it probably is, and that's like it's something I haven't looked at, but also thought a bit about like why I haven't looked into it, and I think the underlying reason for me is that I feel I, I feel like I think I touched on it in the presentation, but I feel like if those it's very clear what those categories are. I feel like I'm not really inspired to play those types of games and look into them. But I think it's just my, you know, it's my perspective. I just haven't I haven't seen a lot of them. So but yeah, I've been kind of looking at mostly mainstream games and you know the retro the retro games of the past. But yeah, I realized there's probably a lot out there. But yeah, I feel that's one of the downsides. If you make if you have these categories, then you're not touching on the mainstream, which is where you know where the money is, where this kind of very, you know, destructive modeling happens and so on. And then it's always and then goes into what I've been saying as well. You make environmentalism into this kind of niche thing, and so yeah, how do you how do you balance messaging and getting people kind of, especially young people, kind of entertained and interesting? That's that's really tough, I think. And
Yeah, well,
also coming up with new like kind of new genres for them as well, because I think a lot of those, like those some eco games that I've seen are very it's obvious they're more for educational purposes. And just the way I was growing up, I was like I had that eco influence from other games. While we had some we had some educational games, but we usually stayed away from them. We were like, that just looks boring.
yeah, well, it's interesting to reflect, because you did mention Pokemon early on. It's interesting to reflect on the evolving kind of discourses around Pokemon, because I remember, you know, Pokemon became big, you know, the game, augmented reality game became big when my younger daughter, who's now 20, was about 10, so about 10 years ago. And, you know, for kids her age, you know, there was a big it was a big fad, a bit like, you know, yo-yos really from my day, you know. But it didn't
Yeah,
last for most of them. Certainly not for her and her friends. Maybe lasted 6 months and then they just went on to the next fad. But I do remember at the time that there was a lot of talk that, you know, oh, this is a way to get kids. Okay, they're kind of on screens, but kind of not, because they're actually out walking around and, you know, walking around their neighborhoods and kind of experiencing nature. But, you know, but I used to laugh because, you know, they're experiencing nature, but they're just looking at their phones kind of, you know. So it was interesting to me, though, at the time, you know, oh, kids are getting more exercise. So, yeah, it was funny how, you know, there was quite a lot of literature published in sort of public health about here's a way to get kids off the sofa and wow, isn't it fantastic? And, you know, get outside in the fresh air.
but you were happy
Um,
with it while it lasted.
oh, look, I wasn't really concerned about that myself, but you know, but as someone who does sort of digital health research, you know, it was interesting to me as a phenomenon. but it's certainly that kind of whole excitement about that. It's getting kids off screens, it's getting them out and about, it's getting them, out and walking the streets of the neighbourhood, making friends and whatnot with others. I don't know, but it really was a short-lived phenomenon. So, and it gets back to what you've just said about, I mean, the game wasn't designed to get kids off the sofa. It was designed to be an augmented reality fun Pokemon game, right? So I get what you're saying about, a lot of educational games, doesn't matter what age you are, if they're just too obviously educational, then that's a big turn off.
I've never with Pokemon, I've never played it, but I remember the phenomena of people going out and doing stuff. But I brought it up in a lecture, and one student said, well, there's all these other games with Pokemon where Pokemon have a bigger role, and there's this relationship between them and their masters, and so there's always there's always these variations, and someone tries to subvert something. If I could see, I could see like Pokemon changing as well. But it's very. I think it's very hard to just get away from those frameworks, from those genres, and then you have, like, my take on it is that I've seen like those cute animal companions they're everywhere. They're more, there's whole stores dedicated now to those cute, I don't know what they're called. With B, starts with B.
Are we talking about Labubus?
Labubus, yeah.
Yeah.
But like I couldn't. That was like that was when I realized, like, what is this? Like, there's a whole store that sells nothing but these huge plushies. So it's not even like a mascot character.
Well, I mean, that was around with
larger than life.
Pokemon, though. I mean, that was really a big thing with Pokemon, like plushy Pokemon characters before the augmented reality game came out. The sort of kids before that, they collected the cards, they collected the plushies. That's not that new, I don't think. Like for kids, say, who are now aged in their late 20s, early 30s. I don't know if you remember that, Annie, because you're around that age, but
well, merchandisable programming. I mean, that was, a big kind of conversation around children's television and programming, like when, bananas in pajamas, like the objective was to sell banana in pajamas toys, like that was the kind of objective, and then the program came second. So I think like there is a kind of longer history of those like programs and video games where like the merchandise is primary.
And I've heard of games,
and like like you collect the Pokemon characters on the augmented reality game, you also collected the cards, you collected the plushies. It's all integrated with this collector culture that has developed over decades now around Pokemon, but just one example. So if we're talking about sort of children's cultures of engaging with consumer culture across a broad spectrum of phenomena, materialities, I guess, again, because I've parented two now young adults, I've sort of seen it in action. Yeah.
Talking about animals. Me.
What have you got there? A pretty cat. A real one.
That's my companion who just switched off the.
A real one. An actual living one with red-blooded.
It's getting a bit. Okay.
It's a big cat.
So yeah, I think with all I mean with all those animal companions, it's that like what troubles me. It's just that it's just that divide and how you can bridge it between one type of animal and another type of animal and so on. I think that's what I'm always thinking about now. Like how can you bring that a little bit closer together? That chicken that comes on your plate and that little, the little cute, the cute cat and dog you have at home. So I find that duality kind of really, really troubling. That like so much emotion goes into one thing, but then so much like just maybe ignorance or even or violence that we don't know about goes into another. It's so I mean we'll never have an ideal world, but if you're just thinking about like we've got the millions, kind of the millions and millions of animals or billions that are kind of killed through industry out of our side. We don't acknowledge any type of individuality in them. I guess we don't think about it a lot, or some of us, but I think it's that that is occurring while we are pouring all so much emotion into these companions and also these cute figures who are who perfectly kind of reflect on us what we want to see kind of. There's been I remember reading a book a long time. It was just about I probably won't remember now, but it was just about kind of the eyes, kind of eyes in animalities and the kind of messages they send to us. And so it was kind of why humans prefer big eyes. And so why do we keep on making things with bigger eyes? The innocence, but there's also kind of the subservience there. There's
Oh, there's a lot of research on cute cultures and kawaii that talks a lot about that. There's a whole field of research on cute studies. But I was going to say My Internet of Animals book, which looks at the way that non-human animals are digitized and datafied across, pets, farm animals, wildlife, across different media forms, from memes and GIFs to animal robots, and tracking technologies for animals, wildlife and farm animals. I mean, the main theme of that book is that it doesn't matter what kind of technology we're using, it's all about objectifying that animal, treating them as a commodity, really.
And games perfectly. I mean,
games as well. So
they model they're actually a great medium for modeling that. You can have an object that you use, and that's that. They're very easy to model. And objectify things. So less. I mean, if we're talking about games, less objectification, but that's I can't see that happening without kind of some broader awareness, or without designers kind of intentionally going in to do that. Because there's just too many other concerns with games. And I saw that like when I was developing my game, I was like, ecocritical stuff sounds nice on paper, but actually kind of putting that in a game when you've got hundreds and hundreds of other things to do, it's very difficult. They're not. It's hard to go in there with experimentation, because like through the whole process you need to know what you're doing. Like it's so much easier to say, okay, I'm going to multiply this horse, and the horse is going to be used for meat. and if you get into like if you complicate those things, it's so that's I think one real barrier I can see in that.
I mean, Roko, I was going to ask you as well just about aesthetics, and because when you were going through some of those early slides, I was thinking about aesthetic categories, like Kantian aesthetic categories like beauty and the sublime. And I kind of share your I guess critique or suspicion and I like the term, candy wrappers from that Chang book, which you referred to. But but no, I think, and I'm also thinking of other things I've read around the sublime and, environmental destruction, and particularly those kind of apocalyptic landscapes that you see. And I'm thinking of like The Last of Us as well as something that's like so kind of vivid and spectacular, but also that it's kind of, numbing in a way. I mean, I'm thinking of Nicholas Mirzoff's work on this, where he talks about the anesthetic as opposed to the aesthetic, where it's actually sort of stultifying and numbing rather than engaging. So yeah, no, I was quite interested then in those kind of lo-fi aesthetic tactics, or those kind of slightly retro or janky aesthetic choices. But yeah, which is, I mean, I sort of just don't want to be too binary though in saying, okay, sublime bad and retro good. But I don't know if you want to kind of speak a bit more to any of those ideas around aesthetics, or maybe even just contemporary aesthetics in video games, and like what you were saying is this kind of, techno determinist like drive towards making things hyper realistic. Take from that what you will.
I think I think I was, I was there for that kind of progression and realism, and it was, I mean, it was constantly exciting, and that's why I think that worked materially, like in getting people excited about the latest technology. Games were very much about that. But now I feel, it's a time where that is really kind of just plateaued. There's no really next big thing. I mean, you can, there's only so much strands you can you can put on a hair before people go, I've seen great hairs. Or I mean, one big thing would be VR, I guess. That's an aesthetic, but that hasn't really taken off. I mean, it's there, but I think it's still out of reach for a lot of people. I don't know, I mean, the way I view it, a lot of, and probably that's my age showing there, but like the more I play video games, the more I appreciate that kind of slower, like if aesthetics allow for kind of slower game play, more appreciation of what like people build, so you can actually see it and appreciate it. It's not going 100 kilometers per hour. And I also feel like if just as an activity, I think just the kind of like the incredible amount of stimulation, it just tires you out. You feel like you've been, I don't know, run over by a truck, and so what is the purpose? Like if you wanted to if you wanted to relax and be immersed, this seems it seems the opposite in a lot of ways. Or that's just very, that's how I feel about it now. So is it only preference? It could be. But I feel like it just gives you so I think kind of the retro comeback, there's kind of been, it's been like that for some time. The negative thing in that, of course, is just kind of the lack of creativity. Remastering everything, as we see in movies and in kind of media generally. It's like it's new idea, old idea. Let's repackage the old idea. It works. So that's the negative side, but I think the positive side is a lot more people kind of going back to games, appreciating them in new ways, appreciate the way things have been done. And I just think kind of like the care to things like kind of characters and environments, and so yeah, that's encouraging to see. I think YouTube and the internet has been great at that, kind of getting all these people together to appreciate that and see the old in a new way. As for like future aesthetics, I don't know. It's diversified so much. So, but I do think like the main push is for realism. And I think it's just kind of bringing the worst, it's carrying over the worst anthropocentric principles of game, which is kind of high cost production, putting what I said about not thinking not thinking of it as having aesthetics. I see that a lot with people who've never kind of who've never thought about it, that it's like of course it's better for things to be more realistic. And the way I see that leading is probably AI. How it's harder for us to tell what is real, what is being created. And so it's probably the most kind of disturbing thing in that. It's basically just kind of painting over things, and us not even realizing. I mean, we realize it, but thinking of kind of kids growing up, thinking of future generations, them not realizing that that it's all what is real, what is art. I don't know. It seems to me kind of just very bad. Very bad for the medium that's got a lot of kind of that has a lot of good things about it as well.
Great. Well, we are about on time, so I think we should probably wrap up. So look, thank you so much, Roko, for coming and sharing your research with us. And I think there was a lot of really generative material there, and I think we had a really great discussion. So thanks also to everybody for coming to our salon. Thank you. Great.
Yeah, it's great what you're doing. So
thank you. And please come to future salons, everyone. It's great to have you. All right. Bye.
Thanks, Anastasia.
Thank you. I'm gonna